The blazing fire and the stone hearth at the center of the room stood witness to the terrible mistake that would, in an instant, alter the fate of the entire palace, and indeed an entire kingdom. When the queen cast that magical, shimmering snakeskin into the flames with revulsion, a heart-wrenching, blood-curdling scream erupted from the prince, a man of peerless beauty who had emerged from that hideous skin only seconds before. The young man's body writhed as if engulfed in invisible flames, his bones cracking, his eyes bulging in sheer agony. Before the helpless, horrified eyes of the tearful Sultan, Gil Shah, the prince's human form suddenly shrank, became shrouded in snow-white feathers, and transformed into a struggling, wailing bird. In a desperate struggle for life, the white dove flew toward the closed window in anguish, shattering the thick glass with a thunderous crash before vanishing into the pitch-black night. As warm, red drops of blood from his white wings, sliced by the broken glass, fell one by one onto the cold marble floor of the palace, all that remained was a life ruined by pride, ignorance, and haste, and the lament of a wounded woman who swore to travel beyond the legendary Mount Kaf to find the man she loved. Dear friends, welcome to this epic, this enchanting tale of the great secret hidden behind appearances, of a mother's longing kneaded with tears, and of how a noble love can break even the most terrible of curses. Before embarking on this long and mysterious journey, where you will feel to your very core how loyalty and patience open eyes blinded by money and power, if you carry that warm fire of kindness, loyalty, and compassion in your heart, please, by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with your loved ones, help that fire of goodness grow even larger and allow these exemplary stories to reach more wounded hearts. In that ancient and silent village where time flows ever so slowly, hidden at the foothills of majestic mountains reaching for the sky, where the wind blows like an old lullaby at night, there lived a villager named Hassan, whose heart was as pure as gold, and his wife Fatma, who was just as compassionate as he. Throughout their lives they had toiled in the fields under the mud, the soil, and the scorching sun, working with humble perseverance. They always embraced with eternal gratitude the meager sustenance God provided, even the piece of dry bread they placed on their table and the single bowl of soup. Their home was a ramshackle wooden house, its roof leaking every winter, their belongings old and worn, but the immense love within them was worth all the golden palaces in the world. Yet in the hearts of these two beautiful and innocent people, there was a deep, incurable, and heavy wound that had been bleeding for years, soaking their pillows with tears at night, the longing for a child. Throughout their long, loyal marriage spanning many years, they never had a child to hold in their arms, to breathe in their scent, and to press to their chests. To hear the cry of a baby in that silent and cold wooden house, the pitter-patter of tiny feet on the wooden floor, or the giggle of a child, they were ready to sacrifice their entire lives, all their possessions, and even give up their own souls. Every night, after completing her evening prayers, Fatma would raise her trembling hands toward the heavens and cry out through her sobs, "O Lord, grant me a tiny child to make me forget my worldly weariness, to bring life to this desolate home where the hearth has gone cold, one I can hold close and who will call me mother." In the darkness, Hassan would hear his wife's silent screams. He would swallow hard in his helplessness, his own heart breaking, yet he would always go to her, wipe away her tears, and offer her patience and hope. On the evening of another grueling and freezing winter day, with snow piled knee-deep, Hassan returned home drenched in sweat, his hands cracked from the cold, carrying a heavy basket of brushwood and logs from the mountains. He dropped the heavy burden beside the stone hearth in the corner. After changing out of his wet, muddy, and tattered clothes, he sat down at the modest table his wife had set, consisting of warm tathana soup and a simple loaf of bread. After they had eaten, as the warmth of the stove slowly filled the room, Fatma turned to her husband with a strange glint in her eyes unseen for years, and with a profound sense of peace and excitement, began to describe the miraculous moment she had seen in her dream that night. "Hassan," she said, her hands trembling as a delicate tear of joy trickled down her cheek, "I saw something in my dream last night. It was as if a divine light descended into my heart from the heavens, from the very wings of angels. God has finally answered the bitter prayers we have offered for all these years." Enveloped in a radiant light descending from the skies, a beautiful child was placed in my arms, and he smiled at me. Hassan smiled at his wife's words. His tired and sunken eyes lit up with joy. "God willing, my dear," he said, "God willing, the Almighty will show us those bright days, and our home will be filled with life once more." But at that very moment, as Fatma continued to recount her dream with great fervor, a strange, eerie, and heavy rustling was heard from within the pile of dry wood stacked beside the hearth. Both fell silent instantly and held their breath and gazed toward that corner in fear. From between the crackling logs, slowly, a snake slithered out, small, yet with scales shimmering like pure gold in the light of the stove, and eyes that gazed like emerald stones. Normally, when a person sees a snake in their home, they would scream and in fear reach for a stick or an axe to crush it, attempting to cast the venomous creature out of their house. But this snake coiled with such distinction, such nobility and docility, that instead of fear, Hassan and Fatma watched it in astonishment, unable to move, as if ensnared by an invisible divine spell. The snake reached the very center of the room and gently raised its head. Upon seeing the snake, Fatma's vast maternal heart was filled not with fear, but with an entirely different sorrow, an indescribable pity. Her eyes welled up. The longing for a child within her became so overwhelming at that moment that she said, "Look, Hassan," weeping, her voice carrying 1,000 years of grief. "Even the cold snakes on these mountains have offspring. The birds flying in the sky have their young. Only our arms remain empty. Only we are left alone in this vast world, like a dry tree, rootless and fruitless." As Fatma's sobs mingled with the crackling of the hearth and filled the room, the little snake suddenly stopped, straightened its head high into the air, and that blood-chilling, mind-bending miracle occurred. Parting its tiny, slender mouth, the snake began to speak in a human voice, perfectly smooth, harmonious, and crystalline, like someone reciting poetry. "O compassionate woman, whose heart is as vast as the sky," said the snake, "do not weep for me, nor shed tears for your own longing for a child. Since your heart has burned for years with the love of a child, with the desire to be a mother, accept me as your offspring. Hold me to your bosom as you would a human child. Do not recoil from me, but give me that maternal tenderness you have so long desired. I swear to you by the Creator of the heavens and the earth, I shall be such a child that I will obey you and my Father throughout my life. I will never bring you shame, and one day I shall repay the morsel of bread and the selfless mercy you bestow upon me tenfold, laying the worlds at your feet." Hassan and Fatma stood as if turned to stone by these words. For a snake to speak with such perfect human eloquence, and moreover to plead for parenthood and a place to belong, was beyond the grasp of reason, logic, and the laws of nature. A deep, chilling, yet sacred silence filled the room. But the vast, eternal, sea-like maternal heart within Fatma crushed all the fears of the mind. She had seen the profound loneliness, the desolation, and a sincerity in the emerald eyes of that speaking serpent. Wiping her tears with the back of her hand, she slowly knelt on the floor to the snake's level. "O small and strange creature," Fatma said with compassion, her voice as soft as a mother's lullaby,
since the Almighty has sent you to our desolate, freezing hearth. And since you have called my withered heart mother, from this day forward you are my beloved child, and this house is your home." Fatma lifted the small snake from the ground with great tenderness, without the slightest shudder or a hint of revulsion, and took it into her arms.
She cleaned it and, using the softest pieces of silk in the house, fashioned a small, warm, cotton-like bed for it right by the stove. From that day forward, a completely different, bright, and joyful life began in that dark, silent, and sorrowful house. Fatma cared for the serpent as if it were a baby of her own flesh and blood. She fed it the freshest milk from the neighbor's cow and offered the most delicious meals with her own hands. The serpent, in turn, kept its grand promise to the letter. It addressed Hassan as father and Fatma as mother, showing them the utmost respect that a devoted, moral, and obedient child would. Months chased months, and years chased years. As time flowed like water, 10 long years passed. The little snake in the corner of the stove, nourished by the love of its parents, transformed into a massive serpent. It became a giant creature, so majestic it would leave any beholder in awe, with a thick body and scales that shimmered like diamonds. It grew into a colossal serpent whose head reached the ceiling when raised. It could no longer fit into that old house. During the day, it would bask in the sun with great majesty in the garden behind the house. At night, it would retreat to its own large, meticulously furnished room specially built for it. The surrounding villagers had heard of this strange situation from afar, and the legend of the giant serpent spread from ear to ear. Out of fear, they stopped even passing through the street where Hassan's house stood. As for Hassan and Fatma, they were so at peace with this wise creature they considered their child that the rest of the world did not matter to them at all. That giant serpent was the apple of their eye. One spring evening, on a warm night when the stars shone in the sky, the massive serpent called Hassan into the garden. "Father," said the serpent, its voice deeper than its former crystal tone, but still respectful, "I have grown up now. I have reached maturity.
It is time for me to build a home, to establish my own lineage, to marry and raise children." Hassan smiled with affection, stroking the great serpent's coarse, scaled back with the tenderness of a father. "You are right, my brave son," he said. "At dawn tomorrow I shall set out for the surrounding mountains and distant villages to find a beautiful serpent of your kind, one as wise, silver-tongued, and noble-hearted as you, to be your bride and bring joy to our home." The serpent shook its great noble head from side to side. "No, father," he said, "my heart does not long for the serpents of the forests or the mountains. Within my heart lies a far more unattainable, far more noble prize. I wish to wed the daughter of this land's mighty Padishah, the legendary and virtuous Gul Shah Sultan. At sunrise tomorrow you shall depart for the great palace. You will stand before the Padishah and, by the grace of God, ask for his daughter's hand in marriage for me, your son." Upon hearing these words, Hassan's knees buckled, his vision blurred, and he collapsed where he stood. "My son, have you lost your senses?" he cried, covering his aged face with trembling hands. "I am but a poor peasant, bound to the soil, subsisting on bread and onions, clad in nothing but rags and patches. The mighty emperor of the world would never permit me to set foot within his gilded palace. Even if a miracle were to occur, and I passed the guards to stand in his presence, should he hear that I seek his only daughter, that exquisite princess, as a bride for a serpent in a peasant's hovel, he would summon the executioner at once. My head would fall in an instant, and my blood would be spilled. He would spare neither of us, and raze our home to the ground."
In a voice both serene and wise, radiating an inexplicable sense of assurance, the serpent spoke. "Do not be afraid, my dear father. Simply do as I have asked.
You shall go to that palace as an envoy. Leave the rest to fate, for God is great." The following morning, with his heart fluttering like a trapped bird, Hassan donned his worn, tattered sandals and set out upon the seemingly endless road to the palace. After a grueling journey of many days, marked by exhaustion and hunger, he arrived at the gates of the colossal palace, a magnificent structure adorned with gold, its towering walls reaching for the clouds. By telling the burly guards at the gate that he carried a matter of state of the utmost importance, a command received from the heavens in a dream, he finally managed to gain an audience, but only after immense struggle, desperate pleading, and spending nights at the threshold. As the Sultan sat upon his massive, jewel-encrusted golden throne, surrounded by scores of viziers and pashas in their silver-threaded kaftans, Hassan prostrated himself in fear upon the ice-cold marble floor, pressing his forehead to the ground. "O great Sultan of the world," he said in a trembling, cracked voice, "for 10 years I have raised a giant serpent in my home, cherishing it as a part of my own soul. It speaks like a man, and its wisdom far surpasses that of any human or scholar. He is my lion son, and it is he who has sent me to your presence as his envoy. He seeks the hand of your daughter, the legendary and world-renowned beauty, Princess Gilshah, to be his wife and consort." Upon hearing these incredible and insolent words, the Sultan was momentarily frozen in shock, unable to believe his ears. Then he erupted into a roar of mocking laughter that echoed through the great dome of the palace. The arrogant viziers and pashas, convinced that this poor ragged peasant had lost his mind under the scorching sun, joined in, clutching their stomachs as they ridiculed him. When his laughter subsided, the Sultan leaned forward from his throne, gazing down at Hassan with pity, contempt, and a cold arrogance. "It is clear you have lost your wits entirely, old man," he declared, his voice booming through the hall. "My only daughter, my Gulshah, is worthy only of noble kings, powerful sultans, and valiant princes like herself, not of wretches and beasts like you. But since you are so bold, since you claim that serpent son of yours possesses a mind superior to that of men, I shall grant you a chance. Go and tell that serpent son of yours, if he can transform all those giant trees, the soil, the leaves, and the fruits in that vast, endless orchard behind my palace into pure, solid gold by dawn, I shall give him my daughter. If he fails, with the first light of morning, I will send my horsemen to take both your head and that serpent's and have them hung at the palace gates as a grim warning," he said, laughing in a mocking, diabolical, and lethal manner. In truth, the Sultan had set an unimaginable, impossible condition at that moment, solely to rid himself once and for all of this poor man, his foul stench, and his nonsensical tale. Devastated, Hassan returned to the village, weeping and stumbling as if he had received his own death warrant from the Sultan's hand. Upon arriving home, he embraced Fatma as if bidding a final farewell to the world, and recounted to the serpent everything that had transpired: the Sultan's impossible condition, his arrogance at the palace, and the news that they would be beheaded by morning. The serpent did not panic. The wise, calm light in its emerald eyes did not dim in the slightest. "Father," it said, "go now and gather various fruit seeds, dried branches, and herb roots from forest. Fill an old sack with them, and in midnight secretly take them to the palace's massive garden without being seen. Bury them in different parts of the earth, pour the water of life upon them, leave the rest to me, and sleep. In desperation, driven by the profound fear of facing death by morning,
Hassan did as he was told.
Every seed and twig he had gathered from the forest, he secretly sowed within the palace's vast gardens under the cover of pitch-black night before slipping away. The following morning, as the sun rose from behind the great mountains, the palace was thrown into utter turmoil. Rising from his silken bed, still heavy with sleep, the Sultan looked out from his grand balcony and stood breathless, unable to believe the magnificent sight before his eyes. Every ancient apple tree in that immense garden, the pomegranates hanging heavily from their branches, the withered leaves on the ground, and even the shortest blades of grass had been transformed into dazzling, shimmering, solid gold. As the first rays of the sun struck this colossal golden garden, the palace surroundings glowed with a blinding radiance, as if engulfed in a sea of fire. The Sultan's mind reeled, his tongue grew still, and his heart began to pound as if it might leap from his chest. What manner of sorcery was this? What inconceivable wealth? What formidable power? The Sultan immediately dispatched his horsemen to summon Hassan to his presence in great haste. His soul was consumed by a ruthless ambition for the luster of that pure gold, and an inexhaustible greed for its brilliance. Yet he remained unwilling to surrender his only daughter, the apple of his eye, to a serpent, to a monster. To go back on his word and to make the task impossible, he devised yet another devious plan. "I see that you have turned the garden to gold," he said, stroking his beard, "but this alone is not enough to win the daughter of the Sultan of the world. Since you desire my daughter, and since that serpent in your home is so powerful, by dawn tomorrow you must plate every floor of my palace, those massive marbles and columns, from the lowest level to the highest, in pure gold, leaving not a single gap. Only then shall I give my daughter as a bride to the serpent's son." Hassan, once again, filled with fear, exhaustion, and despair, returned to the village to the side of the serpent. Upon reaching the village, he stood sorrowfully before the giant serpent.
This time the serpent told him, "Go to the forest and gather fresh, green, newly cut grass. Fashion a thick broom from them, and when night falls, sweep the palace floors softly with that herbal broom." The moment Hassan began to sweep the palace's ice-cold stone floors and its vast, endless corridors at the stroke of midnight, yet another incredible miracle unfolded. Whichever stone or marble the green tip of the broom touched, that stone was instantly transformed into a thick, flawless, and dazzling layer of gold. By dawn, the grand 1,000-room palace had virtually become a colossal monolithic ingot of gold. When the Sultan awoke and saw that the floor beneath his feet, the stairs he climbed, and the very handrails he grasped had all turned to gold, he was driven to the brink of madness by his own pride, astonishment, and insatiable greed. He was left with no excuse, no sanctuary, and nowhere to run. He was bound to honor his royal word for the sake of the state's dignity and honor. Otherwise he would be branded a liar in the eyes of his people, his viziers, and his soldiers, and his golden throne would crumble. Overcome by profound grief, internal ruin, and a desperate fear, the Sultan went to the chambers of his daughter, Princess Gulshah. Gulshah was a maiden so pure and honest she could evoke envy even in the angels, her face radiant with divine light, and her mind exceptionally sharp. The Sultan collapsed at his daughter's feet and began to weep uncontrollably. He confessed how his lust for gold had led him to make a promise to a monster, to a serpent, and how he had been utterly deceived. "My dearest daughter," he said through his tears, "as your father I have committed a grave error. The greed for gold blinded my eyes and stole my reason. Now that loathsome, that terrifying creature is coming to claim you as his bride. With my own hands I have condemned you to that bottomless darkness." Upon witnessing her father in this helpless, dishonored, and broken state, Gulshah Sultan bowed her head with profound submission, showing not a hint of fear nor a single tremor. "My father," she said in her delicate yet resolute voice. "You are the supreme sultan of this land. A sultan's word must never fall to the ground. Every word that leaves his lips is law. If you go back on your word, even if your promise was made to a monster, justice in this land will perish and order will be undone. The very foundations of the state will be shaken. For your honor and the dignity of the state, I accept my own dark fate. I am a princess, and my duty is to protect my people and my realm. No matter the cost, I shall marry that serpent." The following day, a terrifying noise that shook the heavens and the earth erupted at the palace's new solid gold gates. A colossal carriage made of solid gold, adorned with emeralds and rubies, and drawn by 4 massive black elephants, arrived at the palace gates. Inside the carriage sat the gargantuan serpent, with golden scales and a terrifying gaze. The armored soldiers, once thought invincible, and the arrogant viziers whom the Sultan trusted so dearly, were struck with fear by the serpent's majesty. Even the Sultan and the Queen themselves fled to the highest floors of the palace, terrified by the serpent's hissing. They bolted the great iron doors behind them and locked themselves in. In that vast palace, only Gulshah Sultan remained, standing tall in her pure white, gold-embroidered wedding gown, waiting. Without a single tremor or a shed tear, she awaited the monster in her chamber. Slithering across the golden floors of the palace, with heavy rustling sounds and low hisses, the serpent slowly entered Gulshah's room. It gently closed the door with its massive body. With its colossal, cold frame, it loomed directly before Gulshah. Meanwhile, the Sultan and the Queen, trembling with fear, watched the scene helplessly through a secret wooden peephole from the floor above. The serpent spoke, in a voice that was smooth, enchanting, and as clear as crystal. A human voice. "O most beautiful and valiant princess," he spoke, "your kin, your formidable guards, and your vast armies have all forsaken me and fled. Did you not recoil in disgust at my appearance, at this scaled hide? Did you not tremble with fear? Are you truly prepared to wed me in this monstrous form?" Holding her head high, Gulshah gazed directly into the serpent's emerald eyes, her resolve unwavering. "I accept my destiny and the solemn vow of my father, the very oath that upholds the state. Whatever you may be, however hideous your form, you are now my spouse, my husband," she declared. At the very instant those honest and faithful words escaped Gulshah's lips, the hideous serpent's skin split asunder with a deafening, earth-shaking crack. From within that scaled hide emerged a radiant young man, possessed of a beauty unparalleled in all the world. The prince took Gulshah's hands in a firm grasp. "Fear not," he said, "I am a prince from a distant realm, cursed and held captive by the darkest of sorcery. This diabolical enchantment could only be shattered by a soul who would love me of their own free will. The curse would break only for one who looked past my repulsive exterior to show compassion for my heart. Through your extraordinary courage, you have liberated me from this monstrous form, the very prison that held me captive." Watching from above, the Sultan and the Queen erupted in cries of joy upon witnessing this inconceivable and magnificent miracle. Overcome with shame and weeping, they flung open the doors and rushed into the chamber. They embraced the prince, falling at his feet to beg forgiveness for their cowardice. Throughout the land, grand and opulent festivities were held for 40 days and 40 nights, and the poor were fed in abundance. Yet that night, the senseless paranoia and fear born of the Queen's ignorance ruined everything in an instant. In the corner of the room, on the marble floor, the Queen saw that torn and empty snakeskin. Thinking that if the prince were to get angry one day and turn back into that snake, devouring her daughter in his monstrous form and destroying the kingdom, thinking she would eradicate the magic at its very roots, she stealthily took the skin and cast it into the great blazing fire of the hearth mentioned at the beginning of our story. At that devastating second, as the skin began to burn to ash and spread those horrific black plumes of smoke, the prince, who had been sitting peacefully in the room, suddenly collapsed to his knees and began to wail in agony. He let out a cry that shook the heavens and the earth.
He screamed as if his flesh were burning alive. "Queen, what have you done?" he cried out. "That skin was my only sanctuary. I carried that enchantment upon my skin. The spell was not yet fully broken. The cycle was not complete." As the prince writhed in pain upon the marble, his body began to shrink rapidly, his skin tearing and becoming covered in feathers. Within seconds, the handsome prince was transformed into a snow-white bird, a dove, fluttering in tears. The bird flew blindly and with great speed toward the large closed window of the room. He burst through the glass with a thunderous crash, using all his strength. The sharp shards of glass mercilessly cut the bird's pure white wings. As he flew into the dark night sky in agony, drops of warm red blood trickled from his wings, striking the palace windows and the marble below. The prince, bleeding into the dark sky, vanished into the night. He vanished into the night with a piercing cry. The queen collapsed on the spot under the weight of her irreversible mistake, while the sultan wept, beating his knees and tearing at his hair in despair.
But Gul Shah Sultan, rather than succumbing to tears, lamentations, or railing against destiny, rose at that moment and took a solemn vow. "Through your ignorance," she declared, "you have torn my husband, my destiny, and my very soul from my side. I shall track the wake of his wings, journeying to the very edge of the world if I must, until he is found. Regardless of the cost, I will find him." That night, without a word to anyone, Gul Shah Sultan slipped away from the palace in secret. She cast aside her priceless silk gowns, her golden crowns, and her jewels, donning instead the humble, worn rags of a peasant. Alone, she stepped into that ancient, vast forest, a place of pitch darkness where wolves howled and bandits roamed. It was a wilderness so immense and teeming with predators that ordinary men feared to enter even by the light of day. She walked for days, then weeks. Her delicate feet were torn and bloodied. She endured hunger and thirst, shivering in the cold. Yet she never once surrendered to despair. She never looked back toward the palace. Her love was the sole force sustaining her. One night, in the deepest, densest thicket of the woods, just as her strength failed and she collapsed face down from exhaustion, a sudden light flickered before her. A wise and majestic fox appeared, its eyes glowing like embers and its fur radiating a celestial light. Seeing the girl's desperate yet resolute nobility and the unquenchable love in her eyes, the fox was moved to pity. "Whither do you travel, O solitary and noble wanderer?" it asked. With lips parched by thirst and eyes filled with tears, Gul Shah spoke of her beloved. Through her sobs, she told of her husband, the white bird that flew away bleeding, and the grave mistake her mother had made. The wise fox nodded slowly. "That prince," it said, "is far, far from here. He has returned to his own land, to his palace beyond the great Mount Kaf, in his father's kingdom.
Yet, due to the shards of glass from that fateful night, he lies gravely wounded, his lifeblood steadily draining away as he nears his end. The realm's sorcerers, physicians, and sages have all converged upon the palace, yet none could find a remedy or a salve for his affliction. In all the world, there remains but a single cure, a solitary path to healing." Upon hearing these words, Gul Shah prostrated herself at the fox's feet, consumed by a surge of hope and desperation. "Please, I beg of you, tell me," she pleaded. "I would give my life, my youth, I would be your servant. Only tell me the cure." The fox pointed toward an ancient, majestic tree at the forest's highest peak, its branches brushing against the clouds. Within this tree dwell 4 enchanted birds that sing only under the cover of night, serenading the stars. They are in truth celestial guardians, watching over the prince's destiny. Should you take a single feather from the tails of those 4 birds and press them to the prince's bleeding wounds, only then will the enchantment be shattered forever, and the prince shall rise from his deathbed, restored. But be warned, these birds are exceedingly timid. At the slightest scent or sight of a human, they vanish instantly. While they are awake, you cannot hope to take even a single step toward them. You must be patient.
You must wait at the foot of this tree until the stroke of midnight. Once they have fallen into a deep slumber, I shall climb the tree for you, and at the risk of my own life, secretly pluck those magical feathers," he declared. For days, Gulsha waited beneath that majestic tree, holding her breath, on the verge of collapse from hunger and exhaustion. Yet she remained steadfast, never once closing her eyes. At last, one night, the fox ascended the tree like a silent shadow, and softly plucked the 4 shimmering golden feathers from the tails of the sleeping birds. Tucking the magical feathers close to her heart, Gulsha traversed the secret and perilous path shown by the fox, crossing the mighty Mount Kaf and its snow-capped summits. After a long and arduous journey, she finally reached the prince's kingdom.
Upon her arrival at the palace, black banners had been hoisted across the entire land. A state of mourning had been declared. The prince was now on the verge of drawing his final breath, his eyes already closed. Defying the guards who drew their swords and refusing to yield to anyone, Gulsha forced her way into the prince's dimly lit chamber. There, the prince lay motionless, his face as pale as parchment, drenched in blood, his breath fading into silence. Weeping, Gulsha knelt by the prince's bedside. She drew forth the 4 magical feathers she had carried close to her heart, the very reason she had crossed treacherous mountains, and placed them gently, one by one, upon the deep bleeding wounds on the prince's neck and chest. The moment the feathers touched the blood, they erupted in a dazzling golden light, slowly dissolving and merging into the prince's body. Within seconds, those deep wounds, once deemed incurable, miraculously began to close. The color returned to his face, and his noble beauty was restored. As the prince slowly opened his eyes, as if waking from a profound slumber, he beheld his beloved wife, Gulsha Sultan, who had been ready to sacrifice her own life for his. The dark spell cast by ignorance and pride was shattered. Love, loyalty, and devotion had triumphed over death itself. Rising to his feet, the prince held Gulsha in a tight embrace as if he would never let her go again. That day, a grand wedding celebration began within the palace walls, one that seemed as though it would never end. The prince summoned the humble Hassan and Fatma, who had raised him as their own son for many years, to the palace. He bestowed upon them the most exquisite villas, ensuring their comfort for the rest of their days. As for the wise fox, he was appointed the chief guardian of the vast forest and the palace gardens.
Those who do good, the patient, those who never yield to any hardship, and those who never forsake loyalty, attain that great, unshakable peace. While those overcome by arrogance, beguiled by the luster of gold, and driven by prejudice, were left alone with that immense regret and a profound cautionary lesson.